My name is Marjorie Klein. I'm 67 years old and a widow. I live alone in Vermont in the same house where my husband Richard and I raised our daughter. These days, most of my time is spent tending to my garden in the spring, knitting in the winter, and trying not to feel too far away from the people I once meant the most to. Christmas was always something I held on to. Even when it became harder to lift the storage boxes or thread lights around the porch, I did it. For tradition. For Vanessa. She was my only child, and the closest thing I had left to family. She hadn't exactly invited me to spend Christmas with her this year, but she hadn't said I shouldn't come either. That was good enough for me. I left at 5 a.m. The sky was still black and the air carried that frozen stillness that makes even the engines sound loud. I had packed everything the night before. A tin of ginger cookies tied with green ribbon, 3 carefully wrapped gifts, and 1 old wooden music box I had repaired myself. It used to play Greensleeves. Vanessa loved that song when she was little. The snow started around the New York border. Soft at first, then heavier. By the time I hit Albany, I had to lean forward in my seat, peering through the glass like a pilot in a fog. My fingers clenched the wheel harder than they had in years. My knees ached with every stop. Still, I pressed on. There was something comforting in the repetition. Mile after mile, tree after tree. I imagined Vanessa lighting the candles I'd given her last year. I pictured her house warm, her laughter filling the kitchen, Brent pouring wine into mismatched glasses. It had been a long time since I had been part of a full table, but this year I allowed myself to hope. When I reached her street in Pennsylvania, it was almost 6 p.m. The sky had that faint blue tint it gets before night drops completely. Her house sat at the far end of a quiet cul-de-sac. The porch light was on. A wreath hung on the front door. Brent's truck was in the driveway, parked sideways like always. I turned off the engine and sat for a moment. My body was sore. My neck felt like stone, but my heart felt something close to joy. I opened the door slowly and stepped out. The snow crunched under my boots. I picked up the cookie tin from the back seat and steadied the gift bag beside it. The music box was in a smaller box wrapped in gold. I held it close. Halfway up the walkway, I heard her voice. I swear if she actually shows up in this storm, I'm going to scream. There was a pause followed by Brent's voice, lower and amused. Maybe the snow will do us a favor this year. Vanessa laughed. Just once. One Christmas without the speeches, without the pity cookies, without her sitting there acting like the world owes her something because she gave birth. Brent laughed too. He said something I couldn't make out, then added, "She means well." Yeah, well-meaning doesn't make her less exhausting. I froze. The tin in my hand felt heavier. The snow kept falling quietly around me. I looked up at the window. Their living room glowed gold behind gauzy curtains. There was a tree. Ornaments. A string of lights blinking gently. I didn't move, not for a while. When I did, I turned around without a sound and walked back to the car. I sat behind the wheel for a few minutes before starting it again. The air inside was colder than I remembered. The house didn't change behind me. It remained warm and well lit exactly the way I had imagined it all day. But the image felt distant now. As I drove away, I kept my eyes on the road. The snow had picked up again. The headlights caught it in quick flashes like static on an old TV. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't reach for the cookies. I just drove. The silence in the car wasn't heavy. It was the kind that lets you finally hear yourself think. By the time I pulled into my driveway, it was past 10. The porch light was still on from the night before, and the snow had buried the welcome mat completely. I sat for a moment watching the warm light spill across the powdery surface, then cut the engine. The silence inside the house was immediate. No music, no voices, no holiday. Just the faint tick of the baseboard heater and the sound of wind against the kitchen window. I placed the cookie tin and the gift bag on the table without looking at them. My coat felt heavier than usual. My arms ached as I peeled it off and hung it in the closet, careful not to knock the umbrella that always leaned against the corner. The whole house smelled like cedar and wool. It had once smelled like apple pie, like candles and laughter. I hadn't changed the scent in years, thinking maybe it would anchor something in place. I realize now it didn't. I walked into the study and turned on the desk lamp. The soft yellow glow made the room feel smaller but steadier. Everything in here had a place. My filing cabinet was sorted by decade, the drawers labeled in small block letters. I opened the one marked Vanessa and pulled out the stack. The papers fanned across the desk like falling leaves. Tuition receipts, car loans, a transfer for the salon equipment, down payment on the house, emergency dental surgery for Brent, a trip they couldn't afford but I helped cover because she said it was a honeymoon reset. The numbers didn't hurt me. The memory of how easy it was to say yes did. I reached for the other folder, the will. It had been updated last year. Vanessa Langford, sole beneficiary of my savings retirement accounts and this house. I stared at the page longer than necessary, then set it aside. In the bottom drawer behind old tax forms and greeting cards, I found the pamphlet from the shelter. It was just something I picked up at the grocery store one morning, the kind that gets tucked into your purse and forgotten. I had visited once. Then again. They didn't ask questions there. They just showed me how to feed the kittens and where the old blankets were kept. That night I brewed a cup of tea I didn't finish. Then I sat down at my desk and began writing. Not a letter. Not a confrontation. Just instructions. Names to remove. Accounts to update. A short note to my attorney requesting a meeting after the holiday. I reviewed my list twice before putting it in an envelope. Then I opened my laptop and canceled the automatic monthly transfer that sent Vanessa $3,000 on the 10th of every month. I didn't hesitate. I didn't second guess. I just typed my password and pressed confirm. Next came the checking account. She still had access to it. I closed it. Called the bank the next morning and requested all mail be routed through the online portal. No more joint statements. No more shared anything. By noon I had gone through every record, every shared document, and quietly undone a lifetime of attachment. It didn't feel cruel. It felt clean. Later that evening I took out the scarf I had started for her in October and began unraveling it. The yarn came apart easily, folding back into a ball. I would use it for something else. Maybe a lap blanket for the shelter. One of the older dogs there liked to curl up in warm things. His name was Jasper. He limped a little, but he always waited by the door when I came in. He didn't ask for anything. He just sat beside me while I worked. I thought about that as I folded the last sheet of paper into the folder. For the first time in years, I wasn't planning for someone else's future. I wasn't trying to buy love or prove my worth by writing checks. I was just putting things in order. The tea had gone cold on my desk. I didn't reheat it. I didn't need to. The list was done. The folder was sealed. I had stopped waiting for someone to appreciate me and started choosing peace. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. Not to rest, just to feel what it was like to sit in silence and not feel lonely. The room around me hadn't changed, but something inside me had. It started with a voicemail. Vanessa's voice was tight-clipped, layered with forced calm. She said her credit card had been declined at the grocery store. Something must be wrong with the bank. Maybe a system error. She asked me to call her back. I didn't. A few days later, she left another message. The salon's landlord had sent a warning about late rent. She couldn't understand why the automatic payment failed. She ended the call with a nervous laugh and said it was probably nothing. I deleted it without listening to the last 10 seconds. By the second week, the messages came daily. She stopped sounding calm. One afternoon, she called 3 times within an hour. Brent had been contacted by the IRS. Something about unreported cash income from his art shows. He blamed her. Said it was her fault for dragging him into a family full of money drama. She didn't even ask if I had anything to do with it. Not yet. At the end of that week, she came by the house. I saw her from the upstairs window. She stood on the porch for a few minutes holding a box wrapped in a dish towel. Her coat was open and she kept looking down at her shoes. I didn't answer the door. She placed the box on the mat, tapped gently once, then turned and walked back to her car without looking up. I waited until she drove away before I opened the door. The dish towel was one I'd given her 3 Christmases ago. Inside were cookies. Ginger, but not quite right. The edges were too dark. They smelled faintly of lemon, like she'd used the wrong extract. There was no note. The next morning I went to the shelter. Jasper limped up to me when I walked in. He leaned into my side while I restocked the blankets. He always knew when I was tired. He didn't ask for anything. That same afternoon I got another voicemail. Vanessa's voice cracked halfway through. Brent had left, packed a bag and drove to his brother's place in Ohio. He told her she was toxic, that her presence was ruining everything he had built. She said she didn't understand how everything had fallen apart so fast. I listened to the message twice, then deleted it. Rumors had started at the salon. A client posted online that Vanessa seemed distracted. Another mentioned she looked unwell. Someone else questioned whether she could be trusted with money. The manager called her in for a conversation. Vanessa didn't say what was decided, but I could tell by the silence that followed. No more voicemails for 3 days. When she called again, her voice was almost flat. She said the salon had let her go. They were rebranding and didn't want drama. She asked me to call, just to talk. Not about money, not about the past. Just as a mother and daughter. I didn't. Saturday night she showed up again. This time it was late, almost 9. Snow was falling again, though lighter than before. She stood at the edge of the walkway staring at the door. She held a different box, smaller, wrapped in brown paper. No dish towel this time. She stepped forward, hesitated, then placed the box down carefully. She didn't knock. She just stood there. A full minute. Then she stepped back and turned toward her car. I watched from the kitchen window. The lights were off, but I could see her in the reflection from the neighbor's Christmas decorations. She looked thinner. Her hair was pulled back in a way that made her look older. When she got to the car, she sat in the driver's seat for a long time before starting it. The headlights flicked on and she pulled away slowly, her tires crunching softly over the same snow I had driven through weeks earlier. I picked up the box that night but didn't open it. I placed it on the table beside the old cookie tin. The two sat side by side, silent reminders of a shift that had already taken place. One from a woman who expected to be welcomed. The other from someone starting to understand why she hadn't been. I didn't sleep much that night. Not from guilt, from something else. I looked around the house. Everything in its place. The heat steady, the lights low, the quiet deep. For the first time, I understood that peace wasn't the absence of pain. It was the presence of distance, the kind you choose, the kind you keep. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late April. It was tucked among the usual flyers and bills, the envelope plain and addressed in Vanessa's handwriting. I recognized the loop in the capital K of my last name before I even opened it. There was no return address, but I knew exactly where it came from. I stood at the kitchen counter for a while before opening it. The coffee had gone lukewarm by the time I slid my thumb under the flap. The paper inside was lined. Her handwriting had always leaned a little to the right. She started by saying she didn't expect a reply. She wasn't asking for anything. Not money. Not a second chance. She said she'd found a job at a small grocery store on the east side of town. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. She stocked shelves, worked early shifts, and learned to handle the register. She wrote that she walked to work most mornings, and that the quiet helped her think. Her words weren't dramatic. She didn't over-explain. She said the first month in the new apartment had been the hardest. No dishwasher, no heat on some nights. But she liked knowing the bills were hers to manage. She wrote, "I never understood what it meant to build something until I had to build it from nothing." She mentioned Brent only once, said he had called once from Ohio, but that the conversation felt more like strangers catching up. She didn't seem sad about it. More like she had already made peace with the ending. About halfway through the letter, she brought up Christmas. She didn't try to rewrite what she had said. She didn't defend it. Instead, she wrote, "I used to think your presence made things heavier. But now I see it was your absence that taught me the weight of everything you carried." She said she had started baking again. Just for herself. Nothing fancy. She'd found an old recipe card I had written years ago and tried to follow it as best she could. She included a photograph. It was printed on matte paper and slightly crooked at the edges. In it, Vanessa was standing in front of a small window holding a plate of cookies. She looked tired, but steady. Behind her, taped to the wall, was a note written in marker. It said, "Not sadness. Just thanks." I read the letter twice, then folded it along its original crease. I placed it in the top drawer of my desk beside the folder labeled Vanessa. I didn't add a reply, but I didn't throw it away. That afternoon, I put on my coat and drove to the shelter. Jasper was already waiting by the gate. He stood slowly when he saw me, his joints stiff from age, but his eyes still bright. I reached down and scratched behind his ear. He leaned into my hand with the quiet trust that only old dogs seem to understand. Vanessa had given him up 7 years ago when she moved in with Brent. Said she didn't have the time or space. I remembered that day clearly. How Jasper had sat in the corner of the shelter run, not barking, not moving, just waiting. I hadn't known then that one day he'd become mine. I sat with him for a while near the back fence, listening to the wind. I thought about the letter, about the picture, about the version of my daughter who might finally be learning how to stand. I didn't feel the need to fix anything. I didn't feel owed. Jasper laid his head on my knee and I let my hand rest on his back. There was no need to speak. Sometimes peace comes when you stop asking for answers and simply sit with what is.